Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Radio Little Lotus. My name is Peter and I will be your host for tonight. Hello and welcome to this episode on Radio Little Lotus. Today I want to look at something which I've actually should have broadcasted last week, but due to technical difficulties I wasn't able to in the end. The topic of today's subject is healing and where does it begin. This is obviously the first episode in a series which is dedicated to the subject of disease, well-being and healing. On today's broadcast we will be looking at healing from a holistic point of view and where does healing actually begin. So in order to do this we need to look at a variety of different things, and the things that we will be discussing, and I will be discussing, will be the origins and the meaning of the word holos, or holistic, should I say, the meaning of the two words disease and well-being, the three types of sickness, should we say, which are the physical, the emotional, and the mental side of it, the importance of a full look at what is the actual problem with the individual, when does healing work and when it doesn't work, does everyone get healed, as in can anybody actually receive healing and be healed through the holistic side of it, karma in healing, which is going to be a slightly bigger, or should we say, it's a small part of a much bigger discussion, which is the subject of karma in itself, and how does healing work, its stages, its completion, and a full recovery, basically. So let us look at these points from the beginning, and let's have a look at the word holistic and what does it actually mean. Well, holistic is actually a dedicated word, if you like, which actually starts or comes from the Greek word holos, holistic obviously meaning like, or to be like holos. Holos actually means complete. But by complete, it means a viewpoint which is 360 degrees, not as a circle, as in looking at it from the outskirts inwards, but looking at it from every possible angle. So instead of a circle, imagine that what you're looking at within the person, it's actually a sphere. And you are trying to ascertain what the particular problem is from every possible angle. Okay? The other two words that we also need to look at are the two words, obviously, I'm getting emotional. The word disease and well-being. So, if we go and break up the two words, well-being and disease, what do we find? The first one, shall we say, well-being, can be divided into two separate words, which is well and being. Therefore, consequently, it actually means to be well, to feel well, to be at your optimum, to be 100% all of what you can be, basically. Whilst the word disease, which is the opposite, shall we say, is not to be at ease with yourself. Okay, so basically that is the foundation of what you are looking at from a holistic point of view. How well the person is being with themselves, how out of ease they are with themselves and with their true nature. Now, in order to properly ascertain this, we need to go through a series of of tests, shall we say, in order to ascertain as to whether the actual disease, even though it probably has a physical aspect to it, it's just merely that, as in for physical, or is it really emotional or even mental? And by mental, I don't mean somebody who suffers with a long-standing mental disease. I actually, I actually mean something which resides on the mental body. And as far as the physical, emotional, and mental is concerned, I'm actually going to divide those as if they were three separate bodies. The reason why I do this, and the reason why I need to do this, is simply in order to ascertain as to where the initial problem actually lies in the first place. Hence the importance of looking at everything from the 360-degree look. So, obviously, as let's just sort of, I'm going to make a few examples in order to better explain what I'm trying to say to you. Basically, if you are looking at somebody who is suffering from something on a physical basis, you will find that 99% of the time that physical ailment is actually due to something else, so a deeper reason. That could be an imbalance within either the emotional side of themselves or the mental side of themselves, creating therefore a disease between two of those energetic bodies which actually encompass the human body. Now, in order for you to fully understand what I'm intending, it's quite simply put, when we break down the field, the energy field which surrounds a person, which is commonly known as an aura, we actually find that there are several different levels to it. And part of those levels, and the most dense of those levels, are the physical, the emotional, and the mental. Now, by dense, obviously, I mean the thickness or the measure that we could possibly give to the energy which surrounds that person. I mean, obviously, these days where we are quite aware of the fact that we are actually all made of energy, and therefore all energy is related sort of thing within ourselves, we need to keep in mind that everything has to do with our well-being and our not being at ease with ourselves. Okay? So, in order to return to a state of well-being, we need to, like I said earlier, ascertain as to whether this might come from a physical, emotional, or mental body. Now, the reason why we look at these as separate bodies is simply because of the fact that in the way that they are shaped within the aura field, they actually do take on the shape of the human body, sort of thing. As in for, excuse me, they are distances from the human body, which actually, how can I put this? Which actually have a particular distance, and from that distance can be measured as to whether that is part of the physical, emotional, or mental bodies. To give you a better understanding as to what I mean, I don't know how much you know about auras, but in order for you to understand, when you see a depiction of a person, especially somebody who might practice or who might be of a spiritual nature, you'll see them quite often. They are depicted with these big rays of light which are emitting from the physical body. That particular field is just literally the beginning of the aura itself. The aura itself actually expands about 2 meters out from us. That's about 6 foot if you're reasoning in imperial measures. But yeah, basically, and if you look at most people who read auras, what they will actually be able to read is your physical aura, which probably extends out from your physical body a distance of about 4 to 6 inches. Most people actually see the first 2 inches, which is the emission from the physical body itself. Okay, so after that, obviously, you have another body which completely surrounds and encompasses the physical body, which is the emotional body. And on top of that, you would have the mental body as well. That total distance covering the emotional and mental body, physical, emotion, and mental bodies, roughly covers a distance of about 3 foot, which is probably just short of a meter. And that's not to say that they are of a equal distance from one another. They're actually of different distance one to the other and related to the center of the actual being. So when we look at these drawings, like I was talking about earlier, which have, drawings, these images, which depict people who follow a spiritual path and who can radiate this light. Basically, what you're looking at is these 3 particular bodies, which have been completely reclaimed of themselves, and therefore have no. Actually, to say that they have no negativity is actually wrong, but have such an amount of light coming through them because of the fact that they have removed a lot of the negativity, and by this I mean thoughts, emotions, physical well-being and wellness, that it just doesn't touch their energy field, basically. So that's basically what you're looking at there. And the reason, or the way we go and investigate the different things, it's quite particular to the different operator themselves. As in for, when we're looking at holistic healing, or healing through a holistic method, what we need to realize is the fact that different people who are holistic teachers or holistic practitioners actually have a different skill set. So each one of them will have a different skill set, even though most of us have more or less the same generic guidelines. We all tend to practice in very, very different ways, which is why with some people are more successful, with others can be more successful. The reason for this is simply because of the fact that, again, anything that comes into your energy field will cause a reaction. And anybody who is intervening on the on an energy level with different people will do so with their own energy. This is not to say that some people's energy might be negative or not, or might be bad or good for you. It is simply a question of compatibility. The more you are compatible with that energy, the more you are going to receive a positive result from it, basically. So what we are going to look at is how the 3 different levels work. So obviously on the physical side, most people who go and see somebody, it's usually because of the fact that they have a physical condition. Now, like I said beforehand, the physical condition, it's usually due to an imbalance which resides in with one of the other 2 bodies. If you want to think of it on a very, how do I put it? I won't say on a scientific base, because then it would probably be wrong for me to use that term. But if we look at it on the explanations that we have about how energy actually works is basically like this. Energy can take on a physical form once it has a low density. Okay, and the more low the frequency of the object or of the person, the harder that energy actually becomes. So basically the physical body would be an amalgamation of energy which has become so low in its vibration that it has actually taken a physical form. The emotional and mental bodies are not quite that low, so therefore they don't have a physical form, but can be felt and can be seen by some people who have the right skill set. Now, having said this, as to whether they have this skill set or not, most, if not all, holistic practitioners are actually trained to look at every disease from at least these 3 points of view, which is the physical, emotional, and mental point of view. The fourth one, of course, being the spiritual, which would be the next body up, if you like, what some of you also know as your esoteric body. But that is something that a lot of the practitioners don't actually look at, simply because the fact that is more towards the belief system that the person adopts, and therefore it's actually quite difficult to explain, not having a particular contents to go on to, but I will try and bring up an example for you later of this. So yeah, let's go into the physical side. So obviously, excuse me, as I said earlier, if we have a physical problem, this is probably due to something that has happened to us either on the emotional or on the mental side, which has actually triggered off this spark, which has actually made your problem physical, basically. So it's actually lowered the vibration of the emotion or of the mental body so much that the problem itself transcribes into the physical body. If this is the case, obviously we then need to go and find out what the actual trigger was. Now, there are several disciplines, there are several methods that you can actually use to determine as to what the actual problem might be and where it might lay, and it all depends as to which particular school of thought you might follow, or what particular training you have actually received. But basically, like I said, if you're looking at the physical, then we are looking at what the actual disease might be, and what physical attributes it has created within the body itself, in order to find out where that particular problem might come from. On the second body, then, it would be the emotional body. What does this mean? An emotion, which can be either usually a negative emotion, has sparked off something within you, which has actually created a sense of unease within yourself. This unease has become so strong in you that eventually it has lowered your your emotional vibration. So basically your emotions, which are meant to be quite vibrant and compared to what your physical body is, it then lowers the vibration so much that it actually becomes physical again. Again, with the mental side of it, it's exactly the same thing. So if you're looking at something like a mental disease, this is due to something which has been triggered off at some stage, and that usually then transcribes into a something that remains basically unsolved, sort of thing. It then transcribes into the emotional body until the energy lowers the mental energies that much, then it actually becomes physical again. So basically what you need to do is find out a system which actually works in order for for you to actually be able to ascertain as to where the problem lies. So why is it important to look at this from a 360-degree look? Is quite simple. Now, obviously, there are some practices which do require a medical doctor, and obviously, in the light of the coronavirus, which we are still currently living, we can't ignore just how important and how good the work of medical doctors is, but not obviously just doctors. There's the nurses and the whole aspects that goes with the health service in itself. But they are only looking at one particular aspect, and that is the physical aspect. Now, I'm not going to get involved with the coronavirus side of the holistic healing, at least not in this particular episode. But what I do want to give you is okay, so just to give you a very, very brief example as to how something might happen. Okay, say you have something which is occupying your mind, okay, and because of this, it's actually distracting you from what you're actually doing, and due to this, it would cause an accident to happen, as in for, something that, because of the fact that you are distracting your awareness from what you're actually doing, will cause you to, and this can be obviously, both on the mental side and on the emotional side. If you are distracted, this will also cause you to not be concentrating on what you're doing, and actually what you do is concentrate simply on what's either your mental state, which then causes an emotional state to be altered. Now, if you look at the way that some accidents might happen, for example, and I'm talking about accidents around the home or even while walking by, as well as driving accidents and so on and so forth. Basically, you could be completely distracted by what's on your mind, which is causing you to be in a bad mood. This is distracting you from what you are physically doing in that particular moment. The moment you take away your observation, your consciousness from what you're doing on a physical basis, due to the fact that you are distracted from your mental or emotional body, you are causing that. I'm trying to look over a way to actually explain this to you so you can actually understand it, or you can understand the logic of it, shall we say. Basically what you're doing is you're causing an effect, whereas by not being fully conscious of what you're doing, you are allowing room for mistakes which you normally wouldn't do. Those mistakes will then lead to the accident, which then goes to happen. For example, if you are distracted by your own thoughts, or whatever's happening, even with your in these days is actually quite popular on your mobile phone. So your emotional or mental bodies are actually distracted by what you're trying to say to somebody or what you're feeling due to what has been written to you, so on and so forth. This will cause you to be distracted and to be able for you to want to be understood or need an explanation, but whatever it is, it's actually causing you to be in disease, as if you're no longer at ease with yourself, and this is basically what would lead to you possibly walking, I don't know, into a wall, into a post. Now we all find this very, very funny when it happens, at least when it happens to somebody else. But in reality, that's why the physical accident happens. The same is true of disease. Anything which causes an imbalance within the emotional or mental body, away from the physical body, from the physical activity that we are doing. And it's the same thing, when we're going from emotional to physical, or from mental to physical, from emotional to mental, and so on and so forth, sort of thing. Whenever there is a distraction, so your attention, your full consciousness is taken away from your physical body and enters into either an emotional or a mental side of it, that is when something can enter a state of unwellness, so of disease. In order for us to go back into our well-being, we obviously need to find that element which has caused the imbalance and be able to basically transform it into something which is positive for that particular person. Therefore eliminating the disease which has caused and restoring the person's well-being. Now, I've had a lot of people, for those of you who know me, I actually teach a variety of different disciplines which are part of the holistic regime. And one of the questions which I'm very, very often asked is, does healing always work? When does it actually work? And when does it not work? So, in order to ascertain when does healing work, well, again, I'm going to go back to the spectrum which I've just used. Like anything else, healing starts from a much higher vibration that we might realize. Therefore, in order for it to reach the physical body, it would need to first go through either the mental or emotional bodies in order to actually heal whatever is wrong with the physical side of it. And quite often, this is, as to whether the healing works or not, it's actually due to the and those of you who follow psychology or who have any psychological knowledge will forgive me for saying this, but it goes into the psychologists or analysts, what's the word I'm looking for? Cliche, that's it. Why does it fall into a cliche? Simply because of the fact that when we are looking at a person's readiness to heal, we need to actually ascertain as to whether that person is actually ready to heal or not. So as to whether they are ready to let go of whatever is causing their discomfort or disease or not. Does healing work? Yes, it does. Does it always work? Not always. Why? Well, like I said, there is a question of readiness or not being ready. But in order to fully appreciate this, we also need to understand something else. Now, even though mentally we might be tired of physical pain or of emotional pain or of mental pain, there is also certain benefits that that particular disease might bring to us. This could be the attention of others, it could be the care that you need, it could be the fact that you might be in receipt of an income due to this temporary or full-time, shall we say, disability. And by disability, I mean disability to work and not anything else. So if you are under that condition sort of thing, then you might not be so propense to returning to work or to give that up in order for you to actually feel well again. Okay, so there is always that aspect. There is also the fact that some people get fixated in some kind of ideas. They have a particular point of view, which to them it's the all and all, or the end of, shall we say, which may not necessarily be a correct or a healthy point of view. Now, in order to bring this into content, obviously we need to ascertain as to whether that person is ready to receive that healing or not. And here again, it goes into the point of view of the person. As far as I'm concerned, and I've spoken to several friends of mine who are medical doctors, who are psychologists, who are analysts, who are from conventional medicine, shall we say. And they all actually agree with me. If the person is not ready to mend, it can take a very, very long time. If a person is ready to heal, sometimes the results which can be obtained, even within a physical injury, are quite impressive. Okay, so it's not really until we reach that stage where we give up, basically. So where we actually give up to the fact that we are not ready to face whatever is still out there, which is causing our unwellness, our disease. That is where something might become fatal. So where does karma come into healing? Now, like I said earlier, karma is actually a very, very wide subject, and to speak of karma just within the healing side of it would be actually unjust, shall we say. And it's something that actually I believe needs to be discussed quite at length. So what I would like to do is actually take some time to fully explain and explore this particular side, because like I said to you beforehand, this is not a podcast or a radio where you are here to just listen and not be able to ask questions. This is a podcast which is designed for us all to be able to grow, for us all to be able to enter into that phase where we can all grow through this. Okay, so in order for us to grow, for us not to be stuck, and this is actually a cause of disease as well, is the not being able to let go of the past. This can actually be a big no, should we say, as far as our well-being is concerned, simply because of the fact that it causes us not to be present. And as I said to you earlier, what we would actually be doing at that particular stage would actually be that of being concentrated or present within a timeline which has already been passed and which we cannot change. and therefore have no control over her. And being stuck in that kind of situation, it kind of creates a big time sense of uneasiness within us, especially if we continue to how can I put this? Continue with certain actions which are harmful for us, and we don't realize exactly why this happens. Now, like I said to you earlier, this can have such a wide range of reasons that really and truly it is almost impossible to determine where that might come from unless we have a good prior knowledge. And that is what makes usually a good holistic operator. Prior knowledge. Prior knowledge because of the fact that okay. When we are looking at anything of which we become, should we say, masters, this means that we have passed a particular period of time learning that particular discipline. Strictly speaking, we are probably talking about, it's difficult to say as to how long that period should be, but if you go on average and you take any kind of apprenticeship, an apprenticeship usually lasts 5 to 7 years, working 8 days a week, 5 days a week, working 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, or working 4 to 6 hours a day for 7 years. And that actually, if you go and work out, it comes up to about 10,000 hours. I'm not saying that in order to be able to have full knowledge of what a person might be suffering with, you need that much time, because of the fact that most classrooms actually give you enough knowledge for you to be able to start at some stage. Having said that, a well-practiced practitioner is somebody who can recognize through experience, through knowledge, certain signs which are immediate to them, and therefore is probably better able to help the person itself. Again, the more practice we become, the more we are able to see certain things which are not necessarily visible to the naked eye. And by this, I'm not talking about subtle energies, which are the invisible energies which I was talking to you about earlier, but I'm talking about those energies or those particular traits which can be telltale signs of where that particular person might be coming from. In order for us to better understand what I'm talking about, I'm actually going to give you an example of many years ago, a client of mine from many years ago, and it's actually how I was probably first introduced to the word Holos and the holistic world. Now, at that particular time, and I'm talking about between 1999 and 2000, which is basically when I underwent my Reiki 1, 2 and 3 achievements, I came across a young guy who was a croupier on boats, and this guy, very young guy, he was in his early 20s at the time, basically suffered from a frozen shoulder, and the more time he spent out at sea, the worse the shoulder got. Normally he would spend about 6 months out at sea, return for about 3 weeks to a month, maybe sometimes even 2 months, and then be back out for another 6 to 8 months, and so on and so forth, sort of thing. But basically, after the first time, now I should also say that this particular person was the son of one of my colleagues at the time. And the reason why I mention this is because of the fact that my particular colleague was also one of the bosses, it meant that his son quite often came up to our works as well. Now, this probably makes no sense to you now, but as I explain to you what I'm about to, it will probably make a lot more sense to you. So basically, what I noticed, when he was there one day, he was suffering with his frozen shoulder, and I just turned around and said, look, if you want, I will give it a bash, and I will see as to whether I can relieve the pain from you. Which, after maybe 10 minutes of going into my first treatment with him, it actually started to ease itself. By the end of the full treatment, which probably lasted about half an hour, he was completely pain-free until the next day. Now, this made me understand that maybe there was something else behind it, and that maybe I needed to look at this from a different perspective. Now, this guy, as I said, was a fantastic young guy, really lively, very, very full of life, loved his work, loved his family, loved his friends, and missed them. Now, when he was out at sea, by spending some time with him and making small talk to some degree, I actually found myself in a position where I was able to ask him particular questions. And excuse me while my microphone drops off. Basically I was able to ask him particular questions, and one of the particular questions which I asked him was just how difficult he found being out at sea. Now, his answer was actually quite interesting because of the fact that he was actually quite conscious of the fact that though he loved being out at sea and he loved the job that he was doing, what he actually found is that within a certain time period, what would happen is that he would start to miss certain things or certain aspects of everyday life, such as being with his family. I must also say that him and his family were actually extremely close, and he was actually extremely close to his father, hence he used to come down to our works, and he missed his friends. Now, like I said, this was a particular young man, and he had some very, very good friends. Some of them were actually quite spectacular friends as well. And therefore, I think it's understandable the fact that he might miss these people. And that as time goes on, we, I suppose, in this particular time, are quite aware of this. The amount that you might miss somebody actually increases as you go along. So as I realised this, I also realised that obviously there could be an emotional side to this, something that my former training hadn't actually included. In fact, exploring it deeply, or a little bit more deeply, and again I was through conversation with this particular young man, I actually came to the understanding that this particular emotion that he used to live used to play on his mind quite a bit. So, and what he would find is that when he was dealing with his customers on board, even though he did his job really, really well, was always friendly with them, at the back of his mind, there was always something else. There was always I want to see my friends, I want to see my family, I miss my friends, I miss my family. So even though he acted in a certain way, his actual feeling, his mind, was completely elsewhere. He also, under my instruction, went to analyze and observe how his shoulder would react, or how it reacts. And what he actually found is that as the negative emotion and the negative mind side will kick in, what would happen is that he would begin to feel the pain more and more, until he actually got to the stage where he basically could only feel the pain and his shoulder was completely blocked. This was due to the pain that he was feeling, which was transmuted on the physical body, but didn't actually have a beginning in the physical body. It was coming from the emotional and the mental bodies. Now, in order to explain this a little bit better, I'm going to now take a short break, grab a cup of coffee, and explain to you a little bit better how we went to look at the actual discomfort that he was feeling, or the disease, and how we really and truly went to heal him. So we'll be back in just a few minutes. Enjoy the next tune, and I hope to find you all here when we come back. Hello and welcome back. I hope you enjoyed that piece. What was I saying? Of course, this young man basically, or myself, had actually come to the realization that the problem wasn't the movements that he was making as he was performing his job, but it was literally a question of the emotions and the mental state as he was doing this, in spite of the fact that he was having to demonstrate himself as being quite the opposite to what he actually felt. So basically this was causing an uneasiness inside of him at some level that didn't allow him to do his job properly. And as time went on, as he kept repeating the same action over and over again, this energy had become so low in its vibration that he had basically no other option but to let it out through the physical body. And because of the fact that in this particular case, the shoulder is where basically we carry our weight. You know the expression carrying the weight upon your shoulders? Carrying the weight of the world upon your shoulders. That's kind of what I'm talking about. As we carry all our weight on our shoulders, especially our physical burdens, that's where he was emphasizing without giving any kind of relief to his emotional or mental side of it. Now, when he was out at sea, even though he would send letters and postcards as and when he could, he was under the habit of being basically incommunicado with both family and friends. And this was obviously a big burden for him. So, again, under my supervision or under my instruction, he decided to adopt a new way of doing things. And basically what I told him to try was quite simply, every time that you have this initial lack of, or when you start to miss your friends and the activities that you usually do with your friends, then cast your mind back to when you have, and imagine what it will be like when you will do it again. You've been doing this for quite a while, so there is some kind of a routine to it already. Imagine it shouldn't be that difficult. To which he actually answered, actually this is pretty much what I try and do, but I don't always succeed. Again, we had to look as to why. There was something behind this which was stopping him from fully realizing both his life ambition, which was to be a croupier. Actually, he wanted to be the boss, what they call the boss, and the boss is basically the guy who looks after all the croupiers. But given his choice in career and given what he wanted to achieve, basically he was in a kind of a contradictory state, which obviously caused his disease. Now, as we went to look further into this, I asked him to try and be careful, or try and observe what was his thought pattern when these things came into it. And when he thought about the lack of his friends or the lack of his family, he would recollect a kind of a feeling of security. Under further investigation, I asked him why did he feel secure on land and not at work or on sea? For obviously, except for the obvious reason, which is obviously if you're out at sea, even though you are in a very, very safe ship, there is always an element of risk. But I said, apart from that, what is it that keeps you going? What are you actually doing in order for you to cause this emotional state within yourself? And he had actually, fortunately, already noticed this. And basically what he'd come up with was the fact that whenever he would think of his next career move or the next stage of his career, he would realize that he was actually unprepared. And the sensation of being at land, or the thought of being with his friends and with his family, was basically, if I'm not at work, I don't have to think about it. So it was basically, what was behind all of this was the amount of energy and attention that he gave to the fact that he was unprepared for what he was doing. At this stage, the obvious question was, well, how do you get prepared? To which he said there is an element, obviously, of practice. As we mentioned earlier, practice makes perfect, and the more you do something, the more you become good at it. But there is also an emotional detachment from people and from any situation, which is something that he was struggling with, being a very active, in-the-moment kind of person, sort of thing. And so basically this was what was causing an underlying discomfort within him. Plus there was the fact that, even though financially he was doing extremely well, he realized that because of the fact that he wanted to keep his own flat whilst he was at sea, due to privacy things and things like that, also because of the fact that his girlfriend lived inside the flat, which he obviously missed tremendously, and that we haven't considered so far. Due to all of this, he felt extremely out of his reach, basically. To which we now need to add the third element, which I just mentioned now, was the girlfriend. He had also entered into a relationship with a girl that he had been in love with basically since he was a child. And as he gone into the relationship, obviously they made certain decisions. Those decisions are obviously based upon the fact that he would be working at sea and therefore not be present for a long time. And there was elements of this particular situation which he was unsure about. For one, her fidelity, but also the fact that maybe he wasn't sure as to whether he was actually ready for the commitment that the relationship itself actually required. Again, more pressure, more everyday life, if you like, coming to a halt, if we like, simply because of the fact that he was stuck or blocked overseas. The other element of his reaching his promotion was the fact that he would need to take an exam which was quite particular, and for which, when he was working, he didn't have the time to dedicate to the study, and when he was at home, basically he was way too busy enjoying life with his friends and his family and his girlfriend in order to actually spend any time studying. He tried to chuck the occasional hour here and there, but it's from what he explained to me, the situation was such that it really did require a few months' worth of studying. And it seemed to me, such a pity that such a young man with such great potential, who loved his job, loved his girlfriend, and loved his family so much, should be undergoing such tremendous pain when there didn't really seem to be a need for it. And then I decided to look a little bit further into it, because if I then unsatisfied with the answers that I had been given so far, I could feel that something was still afoot. Something was missing to this element. And it was when it kind of came into itself, if you like. And the further investigation in a further sitting that we did together, we got to chat about the work side of it, and basically I found out that his girlfriend was against his pursuing a career as a boss. Coupled with the fact that he was unsure about her in the first place and how she was acting, it kind of made me suspicious, not of the girlfriend, not of his possibility to be able to reach his full potential, but simply because of the fact that I felt there was another element. And I couldn't quite distinguish as to whether this was a sense of guilt due to the fact that he was spending so much time working and not dedicating himself to the study, or enjoying himself while he was on land and not dedicating any time at all to studying, or as to whether it was an underlying fear. Now, after having spoken to him at length, he'd mentioned, ex-girlfriends, he mentioned a few things. What he'd never mentioned was the fact that the prior two girlfriends to his current one had both betrayed him whilst he was at sea. So even though he kept financing the household because of that, then he did believe in the relationship and he did believe in the girlfriend, it was causing him that sense of insecurity, which inevitably led to fear. Now, for those of us who have actually experienced fear, we know that fear can actually be so extreme at times, especially if we overwork it in our minds and emotionally. It can be such an intense emotion and it will freeze anything. You get it? It will freeze anything. Now, couple the two things together, which I've spoken about in my journey of understanding with them. I had the shoulder, which was all the weight upon his shoulders, so the responsibility, obviously, added to the responsibilities which I haven't mentioned, is obviously the fact that North Korea is actually responsible for thousands, sometimes millions worth of betting money, which is obviously a big strain on anybody, sort of thing. But, there's a lot of different factors that obviously played on him. Like I was saying, though, there was an element of fear. Fear of losing his girlfriend and losing his job at the same time, or maybe not going any further, neither with the girlfriend or with the job, and missing out on life as a whole. The pressure of the physical life with the emotional and mental side of it is what was the underlying problem with his physical frozen shoulder. Once we had elaborated the whole thing and he had come to a true understanding of his different emotions and when they actually stood from, because I found that obviously the fear didn't stem from the girlfriend, but it stood from the prior two girlfriends who had betrayed him while he was overseas. One of which I believe had actually lived with him for some time and therefore had caused him, various expenses. In fact, from what he once said to me, I actually realized that she had caused some kind of debt for him as well. But yeah, it was an altogether-ness which basically made the whole situation almost unbearable. But unbearable due to his mental state, to his emotional state. Two states which he had either no need for whilst he was overseas, or any need for within his daily life, here on land, shall we say. But why? Why does something so unrelated to something can come to this kind of a conclusion? And up until, I can also tell you that, up until he was actually ready to let go of what was maybe done to him in the past, as in for, where he'd been betrayed by the two girlfriends who weren't his current girlfriend. There were two separate people, very, very different from the girl that he was with. Also, the girlfriend actually worked, and even though he was legally responsible for the property because it was his house, the majority of the bills were actually being taken care of by the girlfriend who was actually living there most of the time. He was sent a contribution, if we like. But this hadn't changed the initial feelings which were given by the prior relationships. The sense of guilt that he felt towards his work waved itself away once he actually gave himself a break. In fact, it was actually my suggestion that he would take a double, what they call a double shift on leave. And this was to do 6 months on land, basically without pay. So basically the cruise ship would guarantee your work when you returned, but you will be without pay for that time. Thankfully, he was quite an astute kind of guy and had already managed to put enough aside to be able to do this. And in that time, in that 6 months, and he spent with his girlfriend to further his relationship with her as well. Also, he was able to catch up with members of the family that he, obviously, with the years going on, he feared that he might miss out in the later years of his grandparents and so on and so forth. He was also able to catch up with that. Also to have a very, very, I understand, deep and meaningful conversation with his grandfather just before he passed away. It was kind of what gave him the right state of mind. So it was at this stage, really, that he was able to let go of the whole lot. With the physical time being available also to him, he actually started to study for his exam as well. In fact, the girlfriend had actually understood just how much the work means to him and why, and she actually started to support his work. They started to do video calling, which at the time was quite unusual. We are talking about, I believe, the first day of Skype. I don't think then Skype was even about back then. I think it was still MSN Messenger, which was the only kind of chat there was. Uh, but no, I think that, it must have been by the time that Skype had come into sort of thing, then they were actually able to video call. Obviously, we are talking about dial-up connections, really bad quality, all the rest of it. But the fact is that he was able to then communicate with his family, with his girlfriend. He got himself in a situation where he was ready to confront life on all sides, happy with his choices, happy with what uh, he's achieved in his life, and because of the fact that he'd actually done the studying which was required, by the time he got back, he actually found out that he could enter the exam as a boss, failed the first attempt because of the fact that he was unprepared to the initial shock of actually being in an exam so quickly after he got back. But when the exam came some 6 months later, so basically when he was due to come back off the ship, he was given a second opportunity to take the exam, and I'm glad to say that he passed and then became a boss on his own ship. Which, to me, obviously, stories like that is a story of success. But that was my point. The point was getting to understand exactly how the healing process can work. Now, the other side of it is something which I mentioned at the beginning, which we haven't mentioned just yet. Now, this obviously regards the bigger diseases. So, in a way, it is kind of touching on the COVID side of it, but it's not actually about COVID. And there is a little understanding that needs to be done in order for this not to be taken personally. Also, please understand, and before I say all of this, I have actually lived personally several members of my family going through major diseases. My father, even though I wasn't in contact with him, actually died of cancer. My brother has suffered with skin cancer in the past. Various members of my family have died because of cancer. So I am referring to this kind of disease as well. And, sometimes we think, why can such a nice person be confronted with such horrible, horrible, horrible disease to have to face in life? Well, it's difficult to know how to start without wanting to upset anybody, wanting to appear, how can I put it, frivolous with something which is actually quite a painful thing for a lot of people. So, obviously I've mentioned cancer, but there are hundreds of diseases out there which are in some cases incurable, in some cases lethal. But like I said, I don't seem to be want to seem insensitive to anybody, but this is simply my spiritual understanding of it, if you like. It was my personal goal to investigate this, and I kind of get it. There is two aspects of such serious diseases, which are both to do with karma. Now, before you misunderstand the word yet again, please let me explain and just listen for a while. You might understand what I'm trying to say to you. If this has already got you back up in the second, you feel that, how dare you? you should probably turn this broadcast off now. Simply because of the fact that you're not going to be able to understand what I'm trying to say to you. Karma is a very, very complicated subject, and initially it was thought of as consequential, in the same as linear, in the same way as what we visualize time to be, from A to B, linear karma, if you like, would be I'm on the motorway, I beat over the wrong guy, I cut him up, I go along 10 miles down the road, the same thing happened to me. Hey, guess what? Goes around, comes around. That's kind of linear karma. But karma is not linear, simply because of the fact that it is missing one element, and that is the element of time. Karma happens all at once and never happens, in the sense that karma in itself is... Oh, I've never tried to explain this before. Sorry. Karma in itself is missing an element of time, even though time is part of its cause and effect. Karma in itself can actually be looked at as in for cause and effect. So if you do something, like I just explained to you in the linear time, you can expect for that thing to be happening to you as well. You might say, well, I'm a nice person, good things never happen to me. I make good things happen for others, but they never happen for me. You're probably right. You're probably... I don't know. I mean, this is the thing about karma. Because of the fact that you can never really know, and the one thing that people misunderstand is the fact that they say that karma is a payback. Actually, not quite. Sometimes you can actually create positive karma through something negative. What does this mean? Okay. What I mean is actually quite simple. If you think of it, and you look at life through a spiritual perspective, you look at life as the journey of your soul. Now, your soul will have made various gives and takes along this way, or exchanges of karma. And sometimes the karma which they have accumulated through a togetherness of lives might be so big that they need to teach a lot of people very, very big lessons. And sometimes they need to learn very, very big lessons as well. This is where big diseases like cancer, I say cancer, but cancer, HIV, there are many, many, many different diseases out there today, included this COVID, which are there to make us realize a lot of things. And when you look at something like a very good person who hasn't smoked, has never drunk in his life, has always been a good person, is married, takes care of his wife, is not abusive to either his wife or his children or what have you, and they catch cancer. And you think, why? Where is the right in this? Why should a good person like this die because of a disease like cancer? Well, the answer is actually extremely simple, yet might seem a little bit clinical, but it is what it is, sort of thing. And the reality of it is that person's mission in life, or ultimate mission, was that to teach others a very, very big lesson. Now, by being a good person, he might have tried to succeed in leading by example, yet it was not part of their thing to actually teach through that. It would have to be much more physical. It would have to touch people not just on a admiration side, as an inspiration to others, but it would have to touch people's physical lives. And it's not really until we feel things on our own skin that we can fully appreciate certain things. And the thought of how fragile life is not something that most people are comfortable with. The sensation of being not in control, it's something that people are not used to dealing with. Yet it is something that quite often happens in life. Also, part of the learning curve of somebody who induces such lessons is that to be able to keep their faith, their strength, their own vibration as high as possible. Why? How do they do that? Simple. The more they vibrate, the more you are going to be responsive to it. So when you visualize somebody who is, shall we say, or has lived a life which is quite saintly, and still goes through something like that, you are going to be much more touched. You are going to look at life a lot more than what you have done so far. And their lesson is there. It's not in the sufferance that they induce or that they themselves suffer. That pain can be payback, and it can be a prepayment, because yes, karma can also be prepaid. You can pay the consequences of something you're about to commit before having actually done the thing. That's karma. Strange, hard, harsh to understand, but that is karma. Now, because of the fact that any disease is part of karma, and I'm talking about on all levels, from a cold to whatever, sky's your limit, if you like. There is an element of karma to it. Any element of pain has an element of karma behind it. This is due more to our own human nature than anything else. As in, it seems to be that unless we suffer from something, we just don't understand it. So life teaches us through pain. And if we are able to take the lessons that life gives us through pain, we have quite a unique perspective. And I think that you will find that even though anybody who suffers from a terminal illness or from a long illness does have problems, both on an emotional and on a mental basis with what they are suffering, they have quite a unique perspective. And it's a unique perspective which can only be gained by going through those particular things. And it's as simple as that, So when you're talking about the karma which the person is living, that is what it's about. There is also another element which comes into it, which is the element of healing. So to neutralize previous past karma in order for you to be debt-free, but let's not misunderstand, debt-free of that particular thing, and the other side, which is the karma which is being taken on by whoever is dealing with the healing side of it. Now, you may not realize, but basically what happens is an energy exchange. And if I am giving you positive energy, I am giving you part of my positive energy. And in order for you to exchange that, you need to basically repay that with something that equally makes me happy. It's this in today's society, this is usually measured in money, which is why healers, why holistic practitioners charge for their services. Now, there's a lot of people who tend to think that healing should be free. Healing itself is free. The karma that comes with it is not. It belongs to somebody, and somebody has to transmute it. A healer dedicates themselves to healing, and in this way he pays karma that he might owe or earn. But that karma still has a weight on them. And if they're not careful, if they don't fully appreciate the methods which have been passed down, then eventually that karma will come back and bite them. So it is extremely important to also have the time to discharge yourself, if you like, of that karma. And therefore, when you're looking at the amount of time that a healer might spend on a particular session, to you as the client, he might only spend an hour with you. But he will also have an hour's work at home, which is to do with transmuting, with transforming that karma into something positive for all. Now, in all fairness, that particular definition is actually more appropriate of somebody who has reached a very, very high status within healing, and the transmutation of negative karma into positive karma, or of a negative lesson into a positive emotion, is normally more associated with a Buddha or a Bodhisattva or a Viraja, but these are people who are dedicating their life to healing. They are dedicating their lives to their past mistakes, to improving themselves now, and in order for them to maintain that positive vibe which they have built so far, and in order for them to continue to distribute the same energy, obviously they can't accumulate anybody else's baggage, which is basically what it's all about. So, in order to survive in today's society, what a healer must do is to exchange their energy for something else. Because of the fact that the majority of people, especially in the Western world, don't appreciate still the discourse of energy exchange. And in all fairness, our lifestyle probably doesn't allow for that kind of energy exchange. Then the easiest form of exchange is that of a monetary exchange, which again is why people charge for healing sessions. And how much they charge, and what they charge, it's kind of dictated by certain regulations which are usually given by particular courses which a person might have taken, as in for, if you have reached this level of understanding, then you're entitled to charge this much. Why? Because of the fact that basically you're going to spend this much more time in then transforming this into something else. But so basically the deeper you go down, the more time you need in order to not the more time, but the deeper you would have to transmute, and that is down to capability, obviously, and something you as a healer take on. So it shouldn't be inferred on the customer. But then again, like I said earlier, a good master is capable of reaching decisions, of reaching points very, very quickly. And I do say a good master because of the fact that in order to reach a level of understanding which is immediate, so in order to be able to see fast results, one must be able to act very, very quickly and very, very deeply, which means that one needs a certain degree of understanding and practice. This practice can be obtained by pretty much anybody, but it's exactly what it is, it's practice. So the more practiced a person might be, the better the chances are of you reaching a satisfactory point where you can actually see the changes which are taking place within the healing side of it. Now, as I said to you earlier, there is also a question of readiness on your behalf. There is also a question of, which is a trap that sometimes some people can fall into, the trap of not falling into the judgment side of it, which is basically, if you think of it, holistic practitioners, by the way, I should have said this at the beginning and I forgot to, but holistic practitioners, legally speaking, are not allowed to perform a diagnosis of any sort. That is down to the medical profession and the medical profession alone. Should you find somebody who is a holistic teacher who is diagnosing you with something, please walk away from them. They are not only breaking the law, they are breaking an ethical code, which means that they are more interested in your money than your problem. It's as simple as that. Or they're more interested in building their reputation to being the big I am, which is not what makes a good spiritual practitioner. It is not what makes a good holistic practitioner. A good holistic practitioner, it's good because of how then you find it to be good. And also, like I said to you earlier, there also has to be that element of compatibility. Now, that element of compatibility, you will find that the people with experience who have mastered their art are actually quite good at obtaining it with anybody, because of the fact that with experience they have a wider spectrum. Those who are inexperienced, if they're own knowledge lacks the ability, then they will only find cases where they're only able to basically reach a certain level of understanding, and where the client itself will only reach a certain level of understanding, and therefore can only reach a certain level of healing. It's quite a complicated matter to understand, I suppose, altogether. And it is one which needs to be looked at under different aspects, sort of thing, which is why I just wanted to give you a basic idea as to what it is that a holistic practitioner looks at. And that is, and they look at every possible aspect of your problem. So if you find them looking, studying, trying to understand, that's exactly what they're trying to do, is trying to understand. In this moment that they have reached a decision, then they must ascertain as to whether A, you are ready, B, you are able to accept what it is that they have to say. Once this has been achieved, then one might consider actually reaching a stage where healing might be applied. Now, some of you who are Reiki practitioners or who practice non-verbal forms of healing, who do undergo this kind of thing, well, all of what I can say is that maybe you need to relook at what you're doing, and maybe you need to re-evaluate what it is that you have actually understood, and just how effective some of your practices are. Now, if your practices are fine just as they are, maybe you don't need to get to this level, you personally. But does your client? Does the person who is in front of you need to further understand how they have reached this situation in order to become knowledgeable enough to overcome it, in order to become wise enough to maybe avoid it again? Well, like I said, this is a holistic point of view. And yes, I am going to not reach the 2 hours, which is what I normally try and aim for as a broadcast, but this is actually where I'm going to stop, because I want to allow people to listen to this episode, and I want to allow questions to be written, so as to be able to look at part 2 or the second appointment, or what will be the time which we will dedicate to healing as a whole in the future. So I'm going to thank you very much for your attention. I hope to find you all again. If you like, by the way, I'm really, really bad at doing marketing, because the fun, I should have actually mentioned at the beginning, if you like what you hear, spread the message. Share, share, share. If you like what you hear, hit the like. Follow. Make sure then you are aware of when we are actually transmitting. Now, you can do this in many ways. You can go to any one of my Facebook pages. Facebook pages which I have are obviously Radio Little Lotus. There is Peter, Peter Dharma Walker, the consultations. There is a Peter Dharma Walker profile on Facebook. I'm also on Instagram, on Tumblr, on Twitter. So you can basically find me pretty much all the way along any of the social medias. And any of the social medias that you find, please do follow, please do like, and please let's share these moments together. There is also the YouTube channel, which is the Peter Dharma Walker YouTube channel, and that will have its own use as well. But obviously, any broadcasting you find, you will also find on a YouTube channel. Obviously, if you are looking for the pre-recorded podcasts or something that has gone on in the past, I know that all my podcasts have actually been submitted to Spotify, to iTunes, and to all the major podcast distributors. Having said that, if there is something that is not there yet, you will probably find it on my website, and the website is peterdarmanwalker.info. There you will not only find the podcast and the radio broadcasts and a page dedicated exclusively to the radio and the podcast. You will also find my blog, and you will also find my consultations. So you will find my biography and everything that is Peter Dharma Walker. Who am I, and what am I doing here? Anyway, back to us. If you haven't stopped listening to us already, I hope to find you again here on the next episodes. And if you have any further subjects or something you would need to or want for us to look at in depth, by all means let us know. Again, either through the social media, through the website, or of course you can always write to me. My email address is peterdharmawalker@gmail.com. Okay, speak to you soon, and bye for now.